The rumble of heavy machinery was what woke Michael Porter at 6:18 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not his alarm, not the birds that usually serenaded the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge Estates, but the unmistakable growl of industrial equipment. Michael bolted upright in bed, his heart racing as the house vibrated beneath him. "What the hell?" he muttered, stumbling to the window. There on his meticulously maintained front lawn stood three men in hard hats operating a truck-mounted drill. The massive bit was already churning into his property, tearing through the street Augustine grass he'd babied through 2 summers of drought. A fourth man stood off the side, clipboard in hand, completely unbothered by the destruction they were causing. Michael threw on a robe and burst through his front door, barefoot and livid. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he shouted over the mechanical roar. The clipboard man glanced up with the bored expression of someone who had dealt with angry homeowners before. He held up a hand, signaling the operator to pause the drilling. "Geological survey, sir. HOA approved. We need to take core samples from properties along this street." Michael's jaw clenched. "Nobody told me about this. This is my property, and I certainly didn't approve anyone drilling holes in it." The man sighed, flipping through papers. "We had all the necessary permissions from your homeowners association. The notice went out 3 weeks ago." "What notice?" Michael demanded, growing increasingly aware of neighbors peering through windows at the commotion. "Electronic notice, sir." The HOA president, the man, checked his clipboard. Mrs. Diane Lowell assured us all residents were informed. Diane Lowell. Of course it was Diane. The power-hungry HOA president who had cited Michael twice for having his garbage cans visible from the street and once for planting non-approved vegetation when he'd added native wildflowers to attract butterflies. The same woman who had campaigned aggressively to ban satellite dishes despite federal regulations protecting them. "I'm calling Diane right now," Michael said, turning to go inside for his phone. "Sir, we're on a schedule," the man called after him. "We've got 5 more properties to survey today. This will only take another 20 minutes. Michael whirled around. 20 minutes? How big is this hole going to be? "About 8 inches in diameter, down to 15 feet. We'll be putting in a temporary cap afterward. The HOA will handle permanent restoration next month." "Next month? You're leaving an 8-inch hole in my lawn for a month?" Michael could feel his blood pressure rising. The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with your HOA, sir. We're just doing our job." As the drill roared back to life, Michael stood frozen in disbelief. Through the living room window, he could see his wife Sarah now awake, phone already pressed to her ear, likely trying to reach someone who would stop this madness. What the foreman didn't know, what Diane Lowell had apparently forgotten, was that Michael Porter was not just any homeowner. He was a retired civil engineer who had spent 30 years dealing with bureaucratic nonsense, and he knew exactly how to fight back. As he watched these strangers violate his property, a plan was already forming in his mind. The HOA had made a critical mistake, and Michael was about to make them regret it. By noon, the drilling crew had departed, leaving behind an ugly 8-inch hole in Michael's front lawn surrounded by a perimeter of disturbed soil and damaged grass. The temporary cap they'd placed over it was little more than a flimsy plastic cover that looked like it might blow away in the first decent gust of wind. Michael stood over it, arms crossed, as Sarah ended her 5th call of the morning. "Nothing," she reported, frustration etched across her face. "Diane isn't answering. The HOA management company says they'll look into it, and the city claims they have no jurisdiction over HOA-approved projects on private property." Michael knelt down and removed the plastic cap, peering into the dark hole. 15 feet deep, just like they said. What the hell are they even looking for? The neighbor across the street, Tom, said something about a proposed community well system, Sarah said. "Apparently, the water table has been dropping and the HOA is investigating alternatives to city water for lawn irrigation. And they couldn't bother to actually inform us?" Michael replaced the cap with more force than necessary. "This is our property, Sarah, not Diane's personal kingdom." Tom also mentioned they've done this on Maple Street last month. Left holes in everyone's yards for weeks before any follow-up. Michael's jaw tightened. Throughout the neighborhood, he could see other drilling operations in progress, distant mechanical growls and clusters of yellow hard hats visible several houses down. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a coordinated invasion. That evening, the Porter household became command central. Michael spread out the HOA bylaws, property surveys, and county regulations across the dining room table. 28 years in civil engineering had taught him one thing: documentation was everything. "Here it is," Michael said, jabbing his finger at a clause buried deep in the bylaws that required to provide written notice, actual physical mail, not just email, for any physical alterations to a homeowner's property. Electronic communication is supplemental, not primary. Sarah looked over at his shoulder. "And we definitely didn't receive anything in the mail." Not only that, Michael continued, flipping to another highlighted section, but they need signed consent for any geological survey work that involves excavation. An email announcement that I never even received doesn't constitute consent. He reached for his laptop and pulled up his email, methodically searching through spam and junk folders. Nothing from the HOA about drilling or surveys appeared in the past 3 months. I spoke with the Martinez family and the Wilsons, Sarah said. They didn't receive written notice either. Rita Wilson says she got some vague email about infrastructure assessments, but nothing specific about drilling holes in their yards. Michael leaned back in his chair, a grim smile forming. So Diane overstepped. Badly. The next morning, Michael marched to Diane Lowell's house at precisely 7:00 a.m., just early enough to be inconvenient without violating noise ordinances. The HOA president answered the door in a silk robe, coffee mug in hand, her perfectly coiffed silver hair suggesting she'd been awake and prepared for hours. "Michael," she said coolly, "what brings you here so early?" "This," Michael replied, producing photographs of the drill hole in his yard. "Your contractors left this yesterday. No written notice, no signed consent form, no explanation of the restoration plan." Diane's practiced smile didn't waver. "We sent an email about the geological survey weeks ago. It's for the benefit of the entire community." "Show me where in the bylaws it says you can substitute an email for written notice and signed consent," Michael challenged. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Diane's face before she recovered. "The board has discretion to act in the community's best interest during assessment phases. Section 14, paragraph 3. "I've read Section 14, paragraph 3, Michael replied. "It allows for emergency actions, not planned surveys. This isn't an emergency, Diane. This is overreach." Diane's smile hardened. "The survey continues, Michael. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at next month's board meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy day ahead." As she began to close the door, Michael placed his foot in the jamb, a move that surprised both of them. "The survey may continue," he said quietly, "but not on my property. You have until 5:00 p.m. today to have someone repair that hole properly, not with some temporary cap. Otherwise, I'll handle it myself." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Michael?" "No, Diane. It's a promise between neighbors." He removed his foot, allowing her to close the door. Walking back home, Michael knew exactly what would happen next. Diane would do nothing, expecting him to back down like most residents did when confronted with her authority. But Michael Porter was done backing down. He pulled out his phone and called his old colleague from the engineering department. "Hey, Dave, it's Mike Porter. I need to run a cement mixer today." The small cement mixer rumbled in Michael's driveway at exactly 4:58 p.m. He checked his watch and scanned the street in both directions. No sign of Diane or any HOA representatives coming to properly fix the hole, just as he'd expected. "You're actually going through with this?" Sarah asked, standing in the garage doorway with a mix of concern and admiration on her face. Michael nodded, adjusting his work gloves. "I gave her a deadline. She chose to ignore it." He gestured to the mixer where the first batch of concrete was nearly ready. "Besides, I'm actually doing them a favor. That temporary cap is a liability nightmare. Kid could step on it, fall 15 feet down a hole, and guess who gets sued? Not just the HOA, us as the property owners." Dave, Michael's former colleague, checked the consistency of the mixture. "This is high-grade stuff, Mike. Quick setting. Once it's in, it's not coming out without some serious equipment." "That's the point," Michael replied. "If they want to drill in my yard, they need my permission, and they need to do it right." A small crowd of neighbors had begun to gather at a discreet distance, watching the proceedings with undisguised interest. Michael recognized the silent support in their expressions. Other homeowners who had suffered under Diane's imperious rule but lacked either the knowledge or courage to challenge her. At precisely 5:01 p.m., Michael removed the temporary cap from the drill hole. He and Dave positioned the mixer's chute directly over the opening. "Last chance to reconsider," Dave said, though his grin suggested he fully supported what was about to happen. "Pour it," Michael said firmly. The thick gray mixture flowed smoothly down the chute, filling the 8-inch hole with surprising speed. Michael periodically used a rod to ensure the concrete was settling properly all the way down, eliminating any air pockets. They were doing a professional job, better than any patch-up the HOA would have arranged. Tom from across the street approached, hands in his pockets. "Diane's gonna flip when she hears about this." "Let her," Michael replied, not pausing in his work. "I documented everything. The lack of proper notice, the absence of signed consent, the inadequate temporary solution they left behind. I'm simply securing a hazard on my property." "Mind if I take pictures?" Tom asked. "The Wilsons are thinking of doing the same thing." Michael smiled. "Be my guest." By 5:45 p.m., the hole was filled completely. Michael and Dave had carefully tapered the top and even placed a small circle of sod over it, making the repair nearly invisible. They were cleaning up the equipment when a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the house. Diane Lowell emerged, face flushed with anger, clutching her ever-present clipboard. Behind her was a thin man in an expensive suit whom Michael recognized as Jeffrey Palmer, the HOA's attorney. "What have you done?" Diane demanded, marching across the lawn to the now invisible drill hole. The small gathering of neighbors didn't disperse. If anything, more people seemed to materialize from surrounding homes, sensing the confrontation. "I secured a hazard on my property," Michael replied calmly, "as is my right as a homeowner." Jeffrey stepped forward. "Mr. Porter, the Homeowners Association had authorization to conduct those geological surveys. You've just interfered with an approved community project." Michael crossed his arms, showing the signed consent form where I authorized drilling on my property. "The email notification," Diane began, "is insufficient according to your own bylaws," Michael interrupted. "Section 8, paragraph 2. Physical alterations to private property require written notice delivered via USPS or equivalent service and signed consent from the property owner. I received neither." Jeffrey frowned, glancing at Diane. "Is that accurate?" Diane waved a dismissive hand. "It was an assessment phase. We don't need—" "Yes, you do," Michael cut in again. "And I have 6 neighbors ready to testify they didn't receive proper notification either." He gestured to the small crowd, several of whom nodded firmly. Jeffrey pulled Diane aside, speaking in hushed tones. Michael couldn't hear everything, but phrases like potential liability and procedural violation drifted over. Diane's face grew increasingly pinched. When they returned, Jeffrey's professional demeanor had taken on a distinctly chilly edge. "Mr. Porter, while we maintain that the HOA acted within its authority, we recognize there may have been communication oversights." Diane looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "The board will review the notification procedures at our next meeting." "Wonderful," Michael replied. "In the meantime, I've taken the liberty of documenting the exact coordinates of this repair, should the association ever need to revisit this spot, with proper notification and consent, of course." As Diane opened her mouth to respond, her phone rang. She checked the screen, and her expression darkened further. "What do you mean, another one?" She snapped into the phone. After a moment of listening, her eyes shot to Michael. "Did Porter put them up to this?" Another pause. "I'll be right there." She ended the call and pointed a manicured finger at Michael. "This isn't over." "Actually, Diane," Michael replied with a smile, "I think it's just beginning." As Diane and Jeffrey hastily departed, Tom leaned over to Michael. "The Wilsons just filled their hole with concrete, and I heard the Martinezes are mixing up a batch right now." Michael watched the SUV speed down the street, likely heading to confront the next rebellious homeowner. For the first time since moving to Oak Ridge Estates, he felt a genuine sense of community forming, not around the artificial rules and regulations of the HOA, but around the shared determination to stand up for their property rights. "I think," Michael said, placing a friendly hand on Tom's shoulder, "we're going to need more cement." By Saturday morning, Michael's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. What had started as a single act of defiance had sparked a full-blown rebellion across Oak Ridge Estates. 12 households had now filled their drill holes with concrete, and at least 15 more were planning to do the same over the weekend. The neighborhood group chat, previously used mainly for lost pet notices and recommendations for handymen, had transformed into a strategic command center. Homeowners shared tips on concrete mixing, documented their repairs with before and after photos, and reported Diane's increasingly frantic attempts to stop the movement. "She just left my house," texted Eleanor Ramirez from Sycamore Lane. "Threatened to fine me $500/day for unauthorized landscaping modifications. I showed her the video of the drilling crew damaging my sprinkler system and told her I'd see her in court. The drilling company just canceled the rest of the survey," reported Jackson Kim from the north side of the neighborhood. Diane's furious. Sarah scrolled through the messages with a grin. "You created a monster, Michael." "No," he corrected. "Diane created it. I just gave people permission to fight back." Their doorbell rang. Michael opened it to find Tom and 3 other neighbors standing on his porch. Behind them, parked along the curb, was a pickup truck loaded with bags of concrete mix. "We're heading to help the Andersons on Cherry Drive," Tom explained. "They're elderly and can't mix the concrete themselves. Thought you might want to join the cement crew." Michael grabbed his work gloves. "I'll get my tools." For the next few hours, Michael led a team of neighbors fill in holes across the eastern section of Oak Ridge Estates. What struck him most wasn't just the willingness to resist the HOA's overreach, but the genuine camaraderie forming between residents who had previously only exchanged polite nods at mailboxes. Families brought out refreshments for the workers. Children decorated the freshly patched spots with chalk art that washed away with the first rain but symbolized the community's unified stand. Even residents who hadn't been targeted for drilling yet came out to help, recognizing they could be next if the HOA's power went unchecked. By mid-afternoon, word arrived that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for 7 p.m. at the community center. Every homeowner was strongly encouraged to attend. "They're panicking," commented Lisa Wilson as she helped Michael load the last empty bags into a recycling bin. "The Geological Survey Company is threatening to bill them for breach of contract. Apparently, they were supposed to install monitoring equipment in those holes next week." "Monitoring equipment? In our yards? Without our knowledge?" Michael shook his head. "This gets worse by the hour." Back home, Michael showered and changed, preparing for what promised to be a contentious meeting. Sarah handed him a thick folder. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything I could find on similar cases in other HOAs," she replied. "I've been researching all day. There's precedent for homeowners winning against unauthorized surveys. Plus, I found 3 former board members willing to submit statements about how Diane has been reinterpreting bylaws without proper votes." Michael looked at his wife with admiration. "You've been busy." She kissed his cheek. "Nobody messes with our property." The community center was packed when they arrived. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a long table where the HOA board sat with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright hostility. Diane occupied the center seat, her posture rigid, flanked by Jeffrey Palmer and the other 4 board members. As Michael and Sarah found seats, he noticed something remarkable. Nearly every filled chair contained a neighbor who had either already filled their drill hole or helped others do so. The cement rebellion had brought out precisely the engaged homeowners the HOA preferred to keep passive. Diane called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. "We've called this emergency session to address the recent disturbances regarding our community water study. Before opening the floor to comments, I want to make the board's position absolutely clear. The geological survey was approved in accordance with our governing documents. The unauthorized fill-in of test holes constitutes vandalism of community property and interference with official HOA business." A murmur of disagreement rumbled through the room. "Each affected household will receive a formal notice of violation," Diane continued, raising her voice over the growing noise. "Fines will begin at $100 per day until the concrete is removed and the survey holes are restored to their previous condition. Additionally, homeowners will be responsible for reimbursing the HOA for any costs incurred due to the disruption of the contracted work." The room erupted. Michael stood, and to his surprise, the crowd fell quiet, waiting for him to speak. "Ms. Lowell," he began, his voice steady, "would you please identify for everyone exactly where in the HOA bylaws it states that you can drill on private property without written notice and signed consent from the owners?" Diane's eyes narrowed. "Section 14 refers to emergency actions," Michael finished for her. "A planned geological survey announced months in advance clearly doesn't qualify as an emergency." "The board has interpretive authority," Diane began again, "which doesn't override the explicit requirements for property alterations," Michael countered. He opened the folder Sarah had prepared and withdrew a document. "I have your statements from 3 former board members confirming that the proper procedure for such surveys has always required written notice via mail and signed consent forms, none of which were provided." Jeffrey Palmer leaned over to whisper something in Diane's ear, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "many of us have documented property damage from the drilling operations, damaged irrigation systems, cracked pavement on private driveways, and destroyed landscaping. We've compiled a preliminary estimate of damages totaling over $24,000 across the affected properties." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the board members were shifting uncomfortably, several avoiding Diane's gaze. "So," Michael concluded, "you can either resign these threatened fines immediately and compensate homeowners for the damage already done, or you can explain to a judge why you believe the HOA has the right to drill on private property without consent." The silence that followed felt electric. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to clap. Others joined in until the applause filled the community center. For the first time since Michael had known her, Diane Lowell looked uncertain. Jeffrey Palmer cleared his throat and whispered something to Diane that made her face flush crimson. He then leaned toward the microphone. "If I may address the homeowners," the attorney said smoothly, "the board appreciates the concerns raised here tonight. While we maintain that the geological survey falls within the board's authority to investigate infrastructure improvements, we acknowledge that the communication process could have been more transparent." Diane shot him a look that could have cut glass, but he continued undeterred. "I recommend the board enter a brief recess to discuss these matters privately." The 5 board members retreated to a small office adjacent to the meeting room. Through the glass windows, the homeowners could see an animated discussion taking place with Diane gesturing forcefully, while other board members increasingly shook their heads. "Look at that," Tom whispered to Michael. "Carlton and Patrice are actually standing up to her." Carlton Davis and Patrice Wong were relatively new board members who had run on platforms of greater transparency, but had thus far seemed cowed by Diane's forceful personality. Sarah nudged Michael. Reinforcements have arrived. Michael turned to see three more neighbors entering the community center, accompanied by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. With a start, Michael recognized Walter Jenkins, a former Oak Ridge resident who now served as a county commissioner. Walter retired from corporate law before going into local politics, Sarah explained quietly. I called him this afternoon. He still owns a rental property in the neighborhood, so he's technically a member of the HOA. The board members returned from their huddle after 15 tense minutes. Diane's face was set in barely contained fury, while the other members looked either relieved or resigned. Carlton Davis, the vice president, took the microphone, a clear break from protocol where Diane always controlled the floor. After careful consideration, he announced the board has voted to immediately suspend all geological survey operations pending a full review of communication procedures and homeowner consent requirements. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Additionally, Carlton continued when the noise subsided, any fines related to the concrete incidents will be held in abeyance. The board will be scheduling individual consultations with affected homeowners to assess any property damage from the drilling operations. Diane snatched the microphone. I want it noted in the minutes that I strongly disagree with this decision. The board is setting a dangerous precedent that undermines our ability to maintain community standards and pursue necessary improvements. Walter Jenkins rose from his seat. Point of order, Ms. Lowell. As both a homeowner and a county official, I feel obligated to inform the board that the drilling permits filed with the county specifically required documented homeowner consent. Without that documentation, the permits themselves are invalid, potentially exposing the HOA to significant liability. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even Diane seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Jeffrey Palmer quickly took control of the situation. Thank you, Commissioner Jenkins, for that clarification. The board will certainly review the permit requirements as part of our reassessment. The meeting concluded shortly after, with a motion to form a homeowner advisory committee to oversee any future geological work, a committee that would include Michael Porter as chair. As people filed out of the community center, a steady stream of neighbors approached Michael to shake his hand, clap him on the back, or simply say thank you. The cement rebellion had transformed him from just another resident into a neighborhood champion. You did it, Sarah said proudly as they walked home under the streetlights. Michael shook his head. We did it, all of us together. Later that evening, as Michael and Sarah were recounting the meeting to their daughter over the phone, the doorbell rang. Michael opened the door to find Patrice Wong standing on the porch. May I come in? She asked. There's something you should know. Over cups of tea in the kitchen, Patrice revealed the true story behind the drilling operation. The geological survey wasn't just about water, she explained, looking troubled. Diane has been in talks with Vista Development about selling water rights from beneath our neighborhood. If the aquifer testing showed sufficient capacity, Vista would pay the HOA a substantial fee for access. That money was supposed to fund the clubhouse renovation Diane's been pushing for. So this was about money all along, Sarah said, not community improvement. Patrice nodded. Carlton and I were only told about the water table assessment, not any potential sale of rights. When we pressed Diane during the recess tonight, she finally admitted the full plan. That's why they needed monitoring equipment in the holes, Michael realized. They were setting up for long-term water rights negotiations. Exactly, Patrice confirmed. And here's the worst part. The contract with Vista was structured to give Diane a personal consulting fee of 2% of any water rights sale. She stood to make thousands if this went through. Michael and Sarah exchanged shocked glances. The board has called an emergency session tomorrow morning, Patrice continued. Carlton and I, along with Edward Thompson, now constitute a majority vote. We'll be asking for Diane's resignation based on the conflict of interest. After Patrice left, Michael stepped out into his front yard. The repair drill site was invisible now, the grass already recovering from its disturbance. But the changes in Oak Ridge Estates would be far more lasting. What had begun as a simple act of defiance, filling the hole with cement, had exposed corruption, united a community, and reminded everyone that even the most powerful neighborhood tyrants weren't invincible. From across the street, Tom waved and called out, Hey, Porter. Where? 3 months after the cement rebellion, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed. On a perfect Saturday afternoon, Michael stood at the grill in his backyard, flipping burgers for the neighborhood's first official block party, an event that would have been unthinkable under Diane Lowell's reign. Need any help there, Mr. President? Tom called out, approaching with 2 cold beers. Michael grimaced at the title. Don't call me that. Makes me sound like Diane. Not even close, Tom laughed, handing him a bottle. 4 weeks as HOA president, and you've already done more for this community than she did in 3 years. It was true. After Diane's resignation, prompted by the unanimous board vote following the revelation of her secret deal with Vista Development, Michael had reluctantly agreed to serve as interim president. What was supposed to be a temporary position became official when the homeowners voted him in with an overwhelming majority. Sarah emerged from the house carrying a tray of condiments. The Jenkinses just arrived. Walter brought those county maps you asked about. Perfect, Michael said, checking the burgers. We'll look at them after everyone's fed. The backyard was filling with neighbors. Children raced across connected lawns that no longer featured keep-off grass signs. Several residents were setting up tables loaded with potluck dishes, a testament to the diverse community that had previously interacted mainly through violation notices. Carlton Davis approached, his daughter perched on his shoulders. The water committee finished reviewing those alternative proposals. We got 3 solid options that don't involve drilling or selling rights. Michael nodded. Let's add it to Tuesday's agenda. I don't want everyone to have a chance to review before we vote. That had been Michael's first change as president. Every major decision would require a full homeowner vote, not just board approval. The HOA still maintains standards, but now with transparency and genuine community input. Across the yard, Michael spotted Eleanor Ramirez chatting with Patrice Wong. Eleanor caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. As the new board secretary, she had spearheaded the revision of the HOA bylaws, making them clearer and more equitable. The infamous interpretive authority that Diane had exploited was now strictly limited. Jeffrey Palmer, surprisingly, had been retained as the HOA's attorney. After Diane's departure, he'd proven himself to be a reasonable ally, helping navigate the legal complexities of the transition. He was currently engaged in what appeared to be a lively conversation with Walter Jenkins about county water regulations. Quite a change, isn't it? Sarah said, sliding her arm around Michael's waist as she surveyed the gathering. I never expected any of this, Michael admitted. I just wanted to fill a hole in our lawn. Sarah laughed. You filled a hole all right, the one between neighbors. Look around. These people barely knew each other's names before. Now they're planning community gardens and carpooling networks. She was right. A Semitic rebellion had cracked the isolation that had defined Oak Ridge Estates for years. The drill holes, all properly repaired now by a contrite geological company eager to avoid lawsuits, had inadvertently created something valuable, a genuine community. Later, as the sun began to set and neighbors lingered over desserts, Michael found himself sitting with a small group of the original cement rebels, Tom, the Wilsons, and the Martinezes. I heard Diane's putting her house on the market, Lisa Wilson said, sipping her wine, moving to that gated community across town. Good riddance, Tom replied. The part of me hopes she tries the same tactics there. Those retired lawyers and judges will eat her alive. Everyone laughed, but Michael found himself feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy for the former HOA president. She thought she was doing the right thing in her way. She just forgot that a community isn't just property values and perfect lawns, it's people. Speaking of perfect lawns, Maria Martinez said with a mischievous smile, have you seen what the Kim family did with their front yard? Vegetable garden right out front where everyone can see it. We've given Diane a heart attack. It's beautiful, Michael said, and they've been sharing the harvest with everyone on their street. The conversation drifted to upcoming neighborhood projects, the playground renovation, the book exchange box, the walking group for seniors. Each initiative represented not just an activity, but a connection, a strand in the strengthening web of community. As darkness fell, someone started a portable fire pit, and children gathered to roast marshmallows under parental supervision. Michael excused himself and walked to his front yard, needing a moment of quiet reflection.